begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. I pay my respect to their elders, past, present and emerging. I also want to acknowledge my colleagues who are here with me today: Jim Chalmers, Katie Gallagher, Brendan O'Connor, Ed Husick, Annika Wells, Dave Smith and Meryl Swanson, and thank them for their support in being here with me today on our 100 days. I'm proud to lead a government that is advancing the implementation of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Colleagues, the great privilege, the great opportunity and the solemn responsibility of government is putting our ambition for the country into action, converting the promises of a campaign into the progress of a nation, writing our vision for Australia's future into the laws of the land. Our government is only 100 days into this journey, but we are resolved on the destination of a better future. We are focused on building a fair wage, strong growth, high productivity economy. An Australia where working hard means you can pay the bills, support your family, save for the future and achieve your aspirations. An Australia where everyone can trust in quality services, strong Medicare, affordable childcare, decent aged care and a national disability insurance scheme that fulfils its great promise. An Australia where investments in education and training and skills and housing and infrastructure and technology mean the doors of opportunity are open to everyone in every part of our great country. I recognise that we're facing challenging times right now. I know a lot of people are doing it really tough, but I'm optimistic about our country. I believe in the Australian people and I'm energised by the work of building a better future. After a wasted decade, we are not wasting a day. From the moment we were sworn in, we've been working to clear away the mess and chaos of a government who dealt in short-term political stitch-ups, not long-term solutions. We've hit the ground running, restoring security to the national energy grid, delivering support to flood-affected communities, implementing the strongest ever biosecurity measures to protect our agricultural sector, establishing the Defence Strategic Review to make sure that our Defence Force has the capability to meet our changing national security environment, and backing a pay rise for workers on the minimum wage, lifting our climate change ambition and rebuilding Australia's reputation in the region and in our international relations. We've also moved to change the way that government functions, because we understand that governing is bigger than cleaning up after your predecessors, and it's so much more than just reacting to events. Governing can't just be an exercise in getting through to the end of the day, to the other side of the story, or even to the next election. Government has a responsibility to plan for the future, to build for the long term, to implement the reforms that arm people with every chance to fulfil their potential. Not change for the sake of it, reforms that help people to lead better and more fulfilling lives. Central to all of this, fundamental to everything we seek to achieve, is a fairer, stronger, more resilient and more rewarding economy. And getting there, building that high productivity, strong growth, fair wage future, depends on understanding where Australia is now and what's brought us to this point. I see it in phases. We've been through the pandemic response. We're in the middle of the recovery, and reform will be the key to renewal. From response and recovery to reform and renewal, the guiding focus of government action for the coming years. If you think back to March 2020, virtually the sole priority of every level of government was containing the pandemic. That meant border closures, lockdowns, restrictions and billions of dollars in support to try to take edge off the economic consequences. There's plenty about those times we would happily forget, but there are vital lessons that we have to learn. It was a race, and in too many ways, Australia wasn't ready for that race. We were left vulnerable, not just by complacency and a failure to plan, but by years of cuts and willful neglect to the very services and skills that we needed most. We found ourselves economically exposed, hanging on the end of the global supply chain, and we saw the harm of petty partisanship, the damage which was done by the federal government stoking division with the states. Now, whatever we might wish, COVID isn't gone or forgotten. Our health system, our hospitals and our extraordinary healthcare workforce are still under enormous strain. We continue to encourage all Australians to get their third and fourth dose of the vaccine, and we've made it a priority to cooperate with state and territory leaders and the health experts to provide support and resources where they are most needed. But clearly, no one is going back to the response phase. Australia is already in the recovery phase, and that's presenting its own economic challenges, including significant and unpredictable supply and demand imbalances which are driving up costs for businesses as well as for families. Our immediate priority as a Labor government is shoring up the economy to give families, households, businesses the security and certainty that they need. There are also many industries and small businesses that were effectively switched off at the wall and are struggling to reboot. We see that with hospitality and tourism and international education. And then there are sectors that were already under pressure from cuts and neglect, which have been pushed to breaking point over the last 2 years. Aged care, childcare, schools, hospitals. Through hard times, Australians have been simply magnificent, resourceful, resilient, always looking out for others. We saw small businesses innovate and evolve, investing in a decade's worth of technological change in just a year. We saw workers adapt and thrive, proving flexibility and productivity can go together. The success stories are a continuing inspiration, but there were heavy sacrifices too. Teachers reinventing learning for our children, particularly practically overnight. Healthcare and aged care workers being asked to carry on when so much about COVID was unknown. It's no wonder people are exhausted. It's no surprise that so many teachers and nurses and carers are thinking about leaving their vocation. In the pressure cooker of the COVID response, educators and the care and community sector were hailed as essential to the strength of our economy, to the well-being of our society. But the fact is, this has always been true. There's nothing more important than educating our children or caring for our family members when they are sick or looking after our parents when they grow old. A healthy economy depends on healthy people, and education is our most powerful weapon against disadvantage, the best long-term generator of economic growth and productivity. Over the next decade, we're going to need more educators and more carers and more nurses in every part of our system. We won't do that with broken institutions and burnout staff. And whether it's educational skills or healthcare or aged care, we can't just stem the bleeding and hope for the best. We can't return to business as usual when we know that business as usual was simply not good enough. We have to aim higher than just recovery. That's why I say we need reform to achieve renewal, to drive the change that we need in the here and now, but always with a view to how we can shape the future. This is the core of the economic plan that we took to the election, that I outlined here, as Laura said, just 3 days before people cast their vote. cleaner and cheaper energy, better skills and training, cheaper childcare, and a future made here in Australia. My team and I are taking on the challenges of today, and we are building for the opportunities of tomorrow. We are cleaning up the mess of the last decade, and we are preparing Australia for success in the next decade. Whether it's wages or skills, national security or energy, we will act with urgency when it is required. But we will never take our eyes off the big prize, and the big prize is always the future. The chance to secure a new generation of prosperity and fairness for all Australians. Good governments, reforming Labor governments, do both. They face up to the urgent problems of the here and now and take Australia forward to not just imagine a better future, but set about creating one. And the way that we do that, the how, matters as well. When I was here at the National Press Club, I outlined just that. I said the best way to achieve progress is to bring people together. We are giving life to that statement this week. I know there's a school of political thought that views cooperation as capitulation, consensus as weakness. I know there are those who think that everything has to be about conflict, but Australians have conflict fatigue. Our country has lost nearly a decade to the inertia that division produces. We've seen the damage it does to the economy, the toll it takes on the country. Skills and apprenticeships degraded by cuts to TAFE and training. National infrastructure consumed by political pork barrelling. Australia falling to 70th in the world for women's economic participation and opportunity. Climate action and energy policy hostage to denial and delay. And a workplace relations system that's not delivering productivity gains for business or pay rises for workers. These aren't abstract problems. Australians are paying a real price. Of course, there are international factors driving up the cost of living, but it's also clearly the legacy of a decade of wage suppression and insecure work, and too many Australians being locked out of the labour force. Years of undercutting bulk billing, goading manufacturers into leaving the country so we make less here. Supply chains neglected for a decade, and absolute chaos on energy policy driving up power bills. Not only does a culture of division and dysfunction and conflict create these kind of urgent problems in the short term, it stops our country building for the long term. If your priority is scoring day-to-day political points, then the future loses out. This is why our government is focused on solutions, not arguments. The Jobs and Skills Summit we're convening this week is evidence of this. It signals we are willing to look at the hard questions, to face up to the big challenges, to embrace the need for real reform, to solve widespread skills shortages that act as a handbrake on our economy, to remove the barriers that prevent people entering the workforce, to make sure productivity gains translate into rising incomes for Australians. And the summit shows that we're determined to do it by bringing people together, getting everyone in the room, premiers and chief ministers, business and industry leaders, union representatives, a cross-section of civil society and community groups. This week's gathering will be the culmination of more than 100 pre-summit consultations that ministers and government members have conducted all over the country, drawing on input from thousands of Australians, looking at everything from improving economic participation for people with disability, to addressing our migration challenges, to boosting the numbers of Australians training in new technologies. The Treasurer has published a clear set of ground rules, so we're not starting with a blank piece of paper. We're working to a plan, and I'm hopeful there will be some immediate actions coming out of the summit that we can work to implement. But Friday is not the end of the story. The government is preparing an employment white paper, and this week's discussions and ideas will feed into that important document. For us, the principle is straightforward. We want every Australian to have the opportunity and skills to find a secure job with fair pay in a safe workplace, not a hand-to-mouth existence where bills chase you from shift to shift, but a job that helps you build a life and plan for the future. The policies we took to the election were central to this, making job security and gender pay equity objectives of the Fair Work Act, making wage theft a crime, closing the loopholes that allow firms to use labour hire as a tool for driving down pay rather than a source of specialist skills, investing in fee-free TAFE, additional university places and creating new apprenticeships, and creating expert panels focused on pay equity for the care and community sector. In our first 100 days, we've argued for and secured a 5.2% pay rise for minimum wage workers, the heroes of the economic front line. We've made a submission to the Fair Work Commission in support of higher pay for aged care workers. We've introduced legislation for 10 days paid family and domestic violence leave, because no woman should ever have to choose between their safety and their job. But after a decade in which low wages were deployed as a deliberate design feature, we want wages rising and productivity increasing across the board. And after 30 years in which the gender pay gap has hardly budged, we need serious improvement in economic equality for women. This is going to take more than legislative change. We need a culture change too, a revitalising of bargaining and negotiation and give and take, new leadership on respect and safety and fairness for working women. This is why we're bringing employers and employees to the table this week in Canberra, to elevate and accelerate these conversations. Of course, none of us imagine that a two-day summit will entirely fix wages and job security. I know that when we wrap up on Friday afternoon, there will still be $1 trillion of debt. Australian families will still be struggling with the cost of living pressures. Businesses, big and small, will still need help with staff and skills. But for the first time in a long time, I believe we will be moving to agreement on how to solve these problems rather than arguing over who is to blame for them. So yes, I want to see progress on skills and training, on wages and apprenticeships. But the biggest single outcome I'm hoping for is the beginning of a new culture of cooperation, a renewed understanding between unions and industry and small business and government and community groups, that building a stronger, fairer and more productive economy is our shared responsibility and our common interest. This is how we get employers and employees and small business negotiating for genuine win-win outcomes. It's how we make our federation work better, lifting efficiency, improving services and boosting productivity. This is how we sweep aside the persistent structural barriers that prevent women from securing decent jobs and careers and enjoying financial security over their lives. It's how we change the way that Australia looks at childcare as an economic reform which promotes inclusion and growth, not as a babysitting service. An economic reform that delivers benefits to 2 generations of Australians simultaneously. The best start in life for our children, flexible support for modern families, and a multi-billion-dollar boost to productivity and participation without adding to inflation. It's how we seize the transformative opportunity of Australia as a clean energy superpower. More affordable, more reliable renewable energy, powering a new generation of advanced manufacturing and value adding. Australian workers, Australian technology, Australian research and Australian resources, taking the world to net zero. It's how we build the sense of ownership and common purpose our country needs to achieve real and lasting change in everything from early education through to childcare. I'm not saying this will be easy or that it can come without compromise, but I do want the Australian people to know that we are up for this challenge. Put simply, we're having a crack. We're not just occupying the space. That's what governments voted for, people voted for in May the 21st. Governments can build infrastructure, they can create institutions, but they can also draw on our national values. Governments foster a culture of reform and progress and cooperation, nourish a spirit of shared effort for fair reward. Whether it's the summit or the parliament or national cabinet, or here indeed with the Canberra Press Gallery, we're never going to agree on everything. We're never going to have 100% of people 100% happy with every decision and with every outcome. But I know we'll get more done and we'll do it better if we disagree constructively, if we debate respectfully, if we look at the substance of issues rather than question motives, and together if we search for solutions. Good government must drive this culture to make the case for reforms. In order to do that, we need to rebuild trust in government. My colleagues and I don't share the strange self-loathing of our predecessors, raging against the role of government while in government, obsessing over secrecy, having to be shamed into doing the bare minimum at the last possible moment. An ideology that meant even as they made government bigger, the Liberals and Nationals showed no interest in making government work better. 100 days ago, on the 21st of May, the Australian people voted for a better future. Australians have placed their trust in our new Labor government, and I thank them for it. We are determined to repay that trust by demonstrating a commitment to transparency and integrity, holding ourselves to a higher standard of behaviour than it's not illegal, creating a National Anti-Corruption Commission with real power and authority, and examining brutal failures of government services like robo-debt to make sure that that kind of betrayal of vulnerable people can never, ever happen again. Above all, we recognise that renewing people's trust in government requires us to prove government can deliver for people. I know good government can change lives, but I understand that many Australians feel like government doesn't work for them, that politics is obsessed with the short term. And frankly, the only way to change that is to deliver on what matters to the Australian people. And that means taking action on cost of living, cheaper medicine, cheaper childcare, more affordable housing, more renewable energy to bring down power bills. And it means implementing the reforms which create opportunities, lift living standards and include people in the benefits of our national progress. We've been in government now for just 100 days, but my colleagues and I are not there just to mark time. We're here to build the strong growth, fair wage, high productivity economy that will deliver the next generation of prosperity for Australians. Achieving this, moving beyond response and recovery to reform and renewal, will take hard work and it will take tough decisions. It will demand cooperation. It will require us to persevere in the face of tough times. But I have unlimited faith in the people of Australia and their ability and their capacity to rise to the challenge. At the most basic level, three things got us through the pandemic. One, closing our borders. Two, our public health system and vaccinations. And three, the resilience and resolve of Australians. Well, we can't close our borders to the challenges that we are facing now. And we can't vaccinate ourselves against economic competition in our globalised world. And we're not immune to evolving technology. We can't isolate ourselves from climate change or the national security challenges in our region. But our most powerful advantage, our greatest asset, remains the Australian people. And investing in people is how we make economic reform work. It's the answer to the productivity question. and it's the foundation for long-term renewal. This is the heart of our agenda, responding to the challenges of today, reforming for the opportunities of tomorrow, more secure work and fair wages in safe workplaces, proper funding for every stage of education and training and skills, real action on equality for women, backing the services which empower people to fulfil their potential, Medicare, the NDIS, aged care, and cleaner, cheaper energy which will power a new generation of jobs in communities across the country, but particularly in our regions. This is how Labor governments changed the country, investing in people's potential, rewarding their hard work, supporting their aspirations. If we cooperate, if we work together, if we act with purpose and unity and ambition, then we won't just ride out these tough times. We will be well on our way to a better future. And it is that better future that remains our light on the hill, as it always has been. Thanks very much.